We're pleased to welcome now Rebecca Romero Rainey, President and CEO of the Independent Community Bankers of America, also known as the ICBA. Rebecca, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great event, as always, this
Yes.
is. And all these bankers come together and share their ideas, their insights, and many of them talk about with each other. Of course, that's the biggest takeaway. What's working well for them, what maybe isn't so much.
Yes.
Talk about their respective outlooks. But it's always good when they come together, especially in an academic, along with the academic aspect of things as well. The academic community heavily involved in this with Dr. Ken Cyree. But what have you seen so far since you've been here?
Well, I think one of the things that's really different about the event is the engagement with students. And it's one of the things I personally love is the opportunity to not just gather the bankers that are leading the industry today, but to think about the next generation of community bank leaders. And so that's fun. It brings another level of energy. Lots of questions, lots of engagement. I think everybody's trying to figure out where's this world headed, with whether we're talking AI, politics, digital assets.
The economy.
The economy, there's that. So many different possible topics for conversation.
Help the folks understand the distinction between the household names of Citibank and Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan and Bank of America and the community bank that's down the street that they rely on. Tell us about that.
So I like to call it, in this country, we're blessed to have something that's really unique in the world when you think about the community bank footprint and the number of institutions that we have. Really what makes the community bank different is the business model. It's based on a local community. The success of a community bank depends on the success of the community and vice versa. And so it's an ecosystem that really is different. It's an ecosystem where the community bank is there for their customers, not just in the good times, but maybe even more importantly in the challenging times, because again, that's how the community gets through.
Yeah.
And so it's that long-term focus on the relationship, on developing businesses that go through the current generation but are there, decades to come. And so it's that long-term focus, relationship, and engagement in the local community.
Yeah, and they serve a purpose in the market that it's different than many of these big banks serve,
Exactly.
right?
I mean, we need them all, but at the end of the day, as I think back on my banking career, whether it was how we keep the local pediatrician in town or how you get this new restaurant started or, take a gamble on this new hotel. I mean, those are decisions that, especially in smaller communities, aren't being made by the largest banks.
What sort of challenges and headwinds are community banks currently facing?
Goodness, there's a variety these days. I think one of not necessarily a new challenge, but definitely has evolved, shall we say, in terms of the regulatory environment. As we were just talking, what banks do, take deposits, make loans, happens regardless of the size of the institution.
Sure.
But the risk that you find in a smaller institution is very different than what you find in a larger institution. A lot of times, though, we're playing by the same exact rules of the road. And so trying to find an environment where we can proportionally manage that. And these smaller institutions don't have the army of compliance attorneys, to work through and create the scale that some of the other institutions do. I think another thing that we're working through is just, that concept of creating scale. As you think about technology, as we think about how we deploy the latest and greatest to our customers in an environment where maybe there's only a few customers that might be interested in it. So that concept of creating scale.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we mentioned the economic environment earlier. I mean, there's just so much uncertainty in terms of, what's around the next corner and how do we plan for that?
Which affects both, as you know, fiscal policy and monetary policy.
Absolutely.
And that's, it kind of sets up as a black box that nobody can quite predict at this point, especially with just experiencing a month where we didn't get any data.
Right.
No jobs data, limited
and we
jobs
never
data.
will. I mean, it's just
for that
it's kind
month.
of a blip in time.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and probably we won't ever restore that. And that the Treasury Secretary talked about that yesterday, Scott Beston, and so did Kevin Assad from the White House, the Council of Economic Advisors, said, yeah, that's probably never going to happen. We're never going to see that information.
Right.
And the markets sell off because they say, well, that means that they're not going to be inclined to reduce rates because they don't have that information they need to give them the comfort that they can move along that path. The regulatory environment appears to have receded a bit with respect to the restrictions that were imposed by the prior administration and the current Trump administration. One of the first things they did, it looks like they're virtually dismantling the CFPB.
Yeah, I mean it's a fascinating dynamic. So to your point, one of the first things they did is tremendous layoffs of the staff at the CFPB.
Yeah.
Now we're at a point where the funding of the CFPB, the Trump administration has declared, I'm using my own words here, is essentially to be illegal, and so they're not going to request additional funding. So they are looking at running out of funds within the next month to two. And so, some may say, great cause for celebration. One of the questions I'm asking is, there's still a little bit of work we need to do in order to roll back some of the rules or fix or reprioritize some of the work that was done that without a staff there to do it, how does that work get completed? It's also interesting to think the CFPB per statute is the only agency that has authority for consumer compliance supervision at any of the non-banks and any of the banks over $10 billion. So literally by law, nobody else can do that. And so it's just an interesting question for all banks under $10 billion.
Never thought about that. Where does the regulation come from?
Well, so
the oversight.
The oversight, it won't occur.
Won't have any.
Yeah. And so again, for most of the actors, it's probably not a big deal, but there's probably some bad actors out there that, at some point will need some level of oversight. But that does not exist in an environment where the CFPB does not exist.
Okay.
So, and the only way that'll change is through statute.
Okay.
Which requires Congress to act, which isn't necessarily the easiest thing because nobody really can agree, and it's a hard one to solve for. What should this look like?
And there doesn't appear to be an appetite among Republicans who currently are in charge of establishing any new agency or extending oversight to an existing agency at this point. It's sort of expanding government is not something they look to do.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well,
so
that's
it's just an unanswered question.
No,
we'll see how it plays out.
Great insight, though. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So, lots of predictions, though, Rebecca, not too long ago, especially with Silicon Valley Bank failing and other institutions kind of on the hook there. Lots of doom and gloom that never really materialized. Well, why do we seem to miss that? And lots of predictions about commercial property loans and debt. That might be under lots of pressure and collapse as well, but that doesn't seem to be happening. So why are we missing those in our prediction models?
It's a good question. Thankfully those predictions were wrong. I think a lot of times maybe there's some sensationalism. In the event of a crisis, as human nature, we kind of make the most of it, and certainly some of the larger mainstream media didn't help with that. Right. I will never forget the hours I spent doing interviews after the SVB crisis when the headline read, it's a small bank crisis. It's like, come on, give me a break. They were the 16th largest bank in the country. The community banks are solid. They're strong. So it just, I think there was a lot of misinformation out there. So thankfully, that prediction did not come to be. The CRE is an interesting one with commercial real estate, especially as a country we're seeing more folks, remote work, the downtown office spaces, and depending on where you are, maybe aren't used as much.
Right.
At least from the community bank space, the CRE that we have in our portfolios is owner occupied. I mean, it's as a business
so you got people
owner,
paying the rent essentially.
And they've built this property out because they need it, and they're probably went into a couple other folks, and so it's just a very different dynamic. And again, goes to show, one CRA loan to another is just it's not an apples to apples comparison just because they have that label.
Just a little while left, but the overall sentiment, is it optimistic among the community bankers, your members? Do they feel good about the future?
The overall sentiment, yes, is optimistic. There's a lot of questions as we think about, how does AI play a role within our industry? What does digital assets mean as we think about the advent now of a payment stable coin? So there's questions, but at the end of the day, books are strong. We're seeing some great growth. We're seeing demand, great capital. And so, we're in an environment where we'll figure it out and continue to evolve. And that's, over 1,000 of our members have charters that are over 100 years old.
So these are entrepreneurs that built these banks. And
they've dealt with change a lot.
They're used to figuring it out.
Exactly.
To your point. Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca, appreciate you coming on.
Thanks you
a
for
lot.
having me.
That was a great conversation. Rebecca Romero Rainey, President and CEO of the Independent Community Bankers of America, the ICBA. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep. We're coming right back. Final segment of Middays from the Oxford Conference Center.